No word had come from Rhaegar, no riders, no ravens, nothing. Arthur had no way of knowing whether the war had been won or lost, whether the prince was alive or dead, whether anyone was coming at all. By Arthur's count, the baby would not be due for another month. It had only been roughly 8 months since Lyanna disappeared, but what he could see, with the practical assessment of a man who had no medical training but could observe the obvious, was that Lyanna was going to give birth any day now. The child had dropped. She moved even more carefully than she had. She slept badly and woke often and ate little, and when she stood her breath shortened in ways that had nothing to do with exertion. He made his decision at the end of the 6th week. The nearest town was 4 hours south by horse. He would ride out at first light, fetch whoever could be found and return before noon. It was the responsible thing. The child was what mattered, and the child needed a midwife, and waiting any longer was the less responsible choice. He went to bed, intending to leave at dawn. That night before he could, the child came. Part 3, The Tower of Joy. The birth. The child came on a night without stars. It had been raining since midday. Not the gentle Dornish drizzle that sometimes crossed the hills, but something heavier and more purposeful. The kind of rain that came off the mountains with the conviction of weather that has been building for days and has finally arrived at its destination. It hammered the roof of the tower and ran in sheets down the outer walls and turned the yard below into a shallow lake of dark water. The clouds had swallowed the sky entirely. There was no moon and no starlight, and the darkness outside the tower was complete. Inside, the candles burned. He knew only what was in the tower, and what was in the tower was a woman in labor and him, and the nearest village was 5 hours, ride through the rain. She looked at him from the bed, reading his face the way she had learned to read it. "Don't go," she said. Her voice was steady, which was its own kind of courage. "I should get help." "There's no time," she said, "and I don't want you to go." She held his gaze. "I don't want to be alone here." He stayed. He had fought in 100 bouts. He had stood at the king's side through riots and plots and Aerys' worst rages. He had ridden to war and stood in bloodied fields and put men in the ground with his own hands. None of it had prepared him for this room this night, the specific and elemental violence of it, the way a human being arrived in the world fighting, screaming, red with the work of it. The blood was not like fight blood. The sounds were not like any sounds a battlefield made. He had walked into arenas his entire life, knowing exactly what he was doing, and had felt, for the first time in memory, completely out of his depth. He did what he could. He did what she told him. He held her hand when she reached for it and bore the grip without comment, because her grip was fierce and she had earned it many times over. And when she told him what to do, he did it without flinching because there was no alternative. The boy came in the small hours, when the last of the candles had burned low and the rain outside had finally begun to ease. He was small and he was loud, which were, Arthur believed, the two qualities most conducive to surviving in the world. He had dark hair already, very dark, and something in the set of the face that Arthur looked at for a moment before looking away, because his orders were to keep the child safe, and looking too closely was not keeping the child safe. He was Rhaegar's son. That was what Arthur knew. That was what Rhaegar had told him, and Rhaegar had been there for the whole of it, and Rhaegar believed it without question, and Arthur had no reason, standing in this tower room in the small hours of the night, to doubt it. Lyanna held him. Her face in the candlelight was past exhaustion, had moved through it into somewhere else, somewhere very quiet, the particular quiet of a person who has done something enormous and is now simply existing in the aftermath of it. "His name," she said. Her voice was very low. "What?" "His name, I want." She stopped. She looked at the boy for a long moment. The name she had been told to expect was Aegon. She had known it for months, had heard it from Rhaegar with the reverence of a man nomming a prophecy rather than a child. She looked at the baby, and whatever she saw in his face resolved something in hers. "Jon," she said. "His name is Jon, for Lord Arryn, who gave my brother a home when he needed one." Arthur did not ask why she had not said Aegon. He accepted it the way he had learned to accept things in this tower, as a fact, without insisting on understanding it. She was the boy's mother. She had the right to name him. "Jon," he said. "All right." She looked at him then, with those gray eyes that had not looked away from anything this tower had offered. "Please," she said. The exhaustion in her voice was absolute, but underneath it was something that was not exhausted at all, the particular clarity of a person stripped down to what mattered. She looked down at the boy on her chest, and when she looked back up, her face held the specific certainty of someone who has run out of everything except the most important thing. Keep him safe. He looked at her. He looked at the child, small and dark-haired, entirely unaware of the weight accumulating around him, and he thought about what a promise meant when it was made in this room by a man like him to a woman like her. "I will," he said. He meant it. He had never meant anything more completely in his life. He had no way of knowing in that candle-lit room in the small hours of a Dornish morning what the meaning of it was going to cost him. That was perhaps as well. If he had known, he would have made the promise anyway. But knowing would have made it heavier to carry, and it was already going to be very heavy. She looked up at him. Her gray eyes were as clear as he had ever seen them. "Thank you," she said, "for this." Sleep, he told her, I'll stay. He sat by the door through the rest of the night, listening to the sound of the child's breathing and the last of the rain moving off the hills. He kept a candle burning by the bed, not to see by, but because the darkness seemed wrong. He thought about the oath he had taken and the oath he had broken by degrees, and about whether there was a difference between the two when the intentions had been good and the consequences had been what they were. She woke past dawn briefly, with the child still on her chest and her eyes very clear. She was bleeding, and it was not stopping. He saw it in the sheets. He saw it in her face, which had moved past the pale of exhaustion into something else. The particular pallor of a body that has given too much and cannot find its way back to what it had before. He sat beside her, and he held her hand, and he looked at the light coming in through the narrow window, the pale morning light after the rain, and he thought about 5 hours of road between him and anyone who could help. He thought, I have to go. The village. 5 hours down, 5 hours back, and she might still be alive when he returned. He might bring someone who knew what to do. I need to go for help, he said quietly. I'll ride fast, I'll come back. She opened her eyes. She looked at him with those gray eyes, very steady, very tired. Don't, she said. There's nothing they can do that you haven't already done, and I don't want to be alone with him if, she stopped. He looked at the baby sleeping on her chest. He looked at the door. He looked at the 5 hours of road. He stayed. He understood in the silence after that thought what the morning was going to be. They both did, he thought. She had the knowledge of her own body and she was not pretending otherwise, and he had the knowledge of what he could and could not do, and between them there was no version of the next few hours that ended differently. He understood that in a few hours, he would have to ride north with Rhaegar's newborn child. He sat beside her and held her hand, and the candle burned, and the child slept. And outside the window the Dornish hills went from gray to gold as the sun came up, and he thought about all the things he had not done, and all the things he had not said, and he held her hand because it was the only thing left that was entirely within his power. Her breathing changed, slowly, the way things slowed when they were coming to an end. He sat beside her and held her hand, and the morning came fully through the narrow window, and the child slept on her chest as if the world outside the tower did not exist. He went down to stand his watch as the last of the night gave way, hoping Rhaegar would return. The road to the Tower of Joy was a Dornish road in high summer, and Ned rode it with 6 men he trusted, and the understanding that whatever was at the end of it was going to cost him something. He had not been inside the Prince's Pass before. The hills were dry and bright, and the road wound through them with the particular indifference of old roads that had been used for a long time, and had no interest in making things easy. He rode south and he watched the hills, and he thought about what Hightor had said with his last breath, about 7 months and 2 dead Starks, and a war that had consumed the realm. The tower came into view around a fold of the hills. A man was standing in the yard. Ned pulled up his horse and looked, and the recognition arrived like cold water. Arthur Dayne. He had grown up hearing that name. Everyone in the 7 Kingdoms had grown up hearing it, because it was the kind of name that preceded the man by years and followed him by decades, the Sword of the Morning, the finest knight in the realm, the man about whom you heard stories and did not quite believe, and then met someone who had been there and found the stories were, if anything, understated. He had expected, in some abstract way, that there would be a guard. He had not expected this guard. Arthur Dayne specifically meant whatever was in that tower was something Rhaegar had valued above almost everything else he had. Because you did not leave Arthur Dayne to stand watch over something. You did not need the best sword in the realm to protect. Which meant Lyanna was in there. It could only be Lyanna. Ned looked at the 6 men behind him. He looked at the man standing alone in the yard with both swords drawn, and he thought about what he knew and what he could do, and what the next several minutes were going to require. He dismounted from his horse. XII the morning. He heard the hoofbeats from the window. The rain had cleared in the night, and the morning was bright and still, the kind of morning that came after a long storm. The air washed clean, the hills sharp-edged against a sky that was already warming toward blue. He had been watching from the narrow upper window, half out of habit and half because there was nothing else to do while he waited, and the sound of horses reached him before the riders themselves came into view around the fold of the hill to the north. 7 of them, northerners by the look of them, the cut of their cloaks, the way they rode. He stood at the window and he counted them, and he made the calculation that the victory required. He went down the stairs and out into the yard and drew both his swords, Dawn in his right hand, the arming sword in his left, and stood in the morning light and waited. Eddard Stark rode at their head. He was young, perhaps 21, with the dark Stark coloring and eyes the color of a northern sky in winter. He dismounted a few yards from Arthur, and they looked at each other across the quiet yard. Arthur thought about Lyanna upstairs. He thought about the child sleeping on her chest. He thought, this man is her brother. He has been fighting for months to reach this place. She is dying, and he is the only person who can sit with her, the only one who can hold her hand at the end with the weight of family behind it rather than obligation. He thought, and if they see the child, if they see Rhaegar's child here in this tower, A Targaryen heir born in secret while the realm burns around a war fought in Lyanna's name. They would take the boy. They would use him, not out of cruelty but out of the cold necessity of war, the way useful things were used. The child would become a piece in a game, a claim to be leveraged, a symbol for factions to rally around or destroy. A Targaryen prince would not survive in Robert's court. Not as a child. Not as anything. He thought, the woman upstairs is dying. The man in front of me is her brother. He thought, the child is Rhaegar's child. Rhaegar told me to protect it. Those were my orders. Both things were true. They did not resolve. Turn back, Arthur said. His voice was quiet. Turn back now. None of you have to die today. Stark stepped forward, his greatsword raised. Sir Arthur. He said the name with the weight of a man who had grown up hearing it. It's over. Surrender your blades and let me pass. Arthur stood alone with 7 men in front of him. He would either win or he would die. He looked at Stark. He looked at the 6 men surrounding him. He thought about the room above him, and the woman in it, and the child, and the promise he had made. The prince left his family in my protection, he said. His voice was quiet. Something moved through Stark's face. Calculation, grief, the compressed pragmatism of a man who had been making difficult choices for a year. I'm sorry, Arthur said. He meant it, which made it worse. I can't. He moved first. He did not think about the fighting while he was doing it. This was what a lifetime of training produced. The ability to be present in a fight without narrating it, to let the body carry the accumulated knowledge of 10,000 repetitions without the mind getting in the way. 7 of these men would die. He knew it before the first blade was drawn. He knew it the way he knew the geometry of a tournament bout before the horses reached full speed, by reading the field, the spacing, the quality of attention in their faces. Stark's men were soldiers, trained and determined, but they were exhausted from months of war and they were 7 against 1, which was actually a disadvantage against a man like Arthur Dayne, because 7 men in a confined space created more problems for 7 men than for 1. They got in each other's way. They hesitated at crucial fractions of a second for fear of cutting their companions. He did not hesitate. The first man was dead before the others had fully registered that Arthur had moved. Dawn took him across the neck in the same motion that cleared the scabbard, a combination so fast it registered as a single thing. 7 became 6. He moved through them with the cold precision of someone doing a necessary job. He flanked where they expected a frontal attack. He used the yard's geometry against them, the wall behind him, the horses at the edge providing a distraction at the right moment, the morning light coming from the east, and finding the eyes of men whose attention was already divided. He killed 4 of them in the time it took Stark to regroup and direct the remaining 2, and by then the mathematics had changed irrevocably. 6 became 5, 5 became 4, 4 became 3, 3 became 2. Ned Stark and one other, a small man with a long knife who had been in this fight from the start and was still standing, bleeding from a cut above his eye. They came at him together. Stark drove high and right, committing his full weight behind his greatsword, forcing Arthur to commit Dawn to the block. The small man went low in the same instant, inside his reach, driving for the unarmored side. He blocked Stark's blade with Dawn. He turned the arming sword almost casually to deflect the knife. But the angle cost him a step backward, and for 3 seconds the 3 of them stood locked in a contest of strength and leverage that Stark's arms were losing by fractions. Then the small man stumbled, and Arthur's arming sword came free and came across, and the man went down hard, clutching his side. Ned stood alone. He was bleeding from 2 places, with the look of a man who knows he is about to die and is not ready. Then he took a breath and stopped fighting. He lowered his sword, not in surrender, in something else, something that cost him. Arthur, the command was gone from his voice. What was left was older. Your king is dead. Rhaegar is dead. Robert now sits upon the throne. Please. He stopped. He started again. Tell me where my sister is. Arthur stood with both blades ready, and he looked at Eddard Stark, and at the men lying on the pale stone around them, and he thought about the room above him and the woman in it, and the child and the promise. He thought about the white cloak, about what it had always meant, and what it had not been sufficient to prevent, and what it was worth now, in this yard, in this morning, with these dead. Rhaegar was dead. King Aerys was dead. The dynasty he had worn on his chest for 7 years, the prince he had followed to this tower, the king he had served in silence while men burned in the throne room, they were gone. Both of them. The oath he had taken had been given to people who no longer existed. He thought about the child above him, Rhaegar's child, the promised prince, or so Rhaegar had believed, with the absolute conviction of a man who had stopped being able to doubt himself. The child that Arthur had been ordered to protect at any cost, and the cost had been 5 men in this yard and a dying woman at the top of the stairs, and whatever the cost was going to continue to be if he kept going. He thought, the woman at the top of the stairs is dying. The man in front of me is her brother. He is the only person in the world who can reach her. He thought, the vow is discharged. The king is dead. The prince is dead. What remains is only a dying woman. And then, standing in the yard in the warm morning light with the dead around him and Dawn in his hand, he felt it, not grief, not exactly, but something that sat in the same place grief did. Shame. Not for what he had just done, for everything that had come before it. For the years of keeping himself in a sealed compartment so that he could stand in corridors while men burned and not break. For the vow he had believed in so completely that he had been prepared to deny a dying woman her brother, to leave her alone in a tower because a delusional prince had given him an order. For the white cloak, which he had worn as though it meant what the stories said it meant, and which had not meant that at all. The Kingsguard had not been what he thought it was. The service had not been what he thought it was. He had been wrong about almost everything that had seemed most certain. The prince is dead, he said at last. The words came out quietly. And Robert is king. He paused. Give me your word, tell the world I died here, let me walk away. Stark looked at the small man beside him, who nodded once, and Arthur read in the small man's face the willingness of someone who understood exactly what was being offered and why. You have it, Stark said without hesitation. You have my word. Arthur looked at him for a moment. He looked at the tower door. He thought of Lyanna's face in the candlelight, the sound of a child arriving in the world. Waste no time, he said. She needs you. He stepped aside. Stark and the small man walked past him and into the tower, and Arthur listened to their boots on the stairs, going up, and he did not follow them. He stood in the yard alone with the dead and the pale morning light. He looked at Dawn in his right hand, pale blade and blood-marked. He had carried it for 8 years. He had been given it at 16 in a great hall full of morning light, and the weight of it had been the first real weight he had ever felt, heavier than it appeared and heavier still in the ways that mattered, and he had understood from the moment it touched his hands that it was not a possession but a relationship, a thing that required something of him rather than simply being his. He wiped it. He used his cloak carefully, working along the blade the way he had always cleaned it, from the base toward the tip, not from tip to base. The blood came off and the pale metal was itself again, pale and cold and gathering the morning light in the way it always did, refusing to give it back. He set it down. He placed it carefully. Point against the stone, blade upright, and he took his hands away from the grip, and he stepped back, and for a long moment he stood looking at it, the pale blade in the pale morning light, still and bright and entirely itself regardless of what he was or was not. The sword had no opinion about his worthiness. The sword simply waited. He would not be there when Ned Stark came back out of the tower. He would not watch it be picked up. He thought of Ashara. He thought of her gray eyes and the careful way she moved through rooms and the question she had asked him in the corridor outside the Queen's chambers. Are you happy, Arthur? He had not been, and he had not been honest about it, and she had known he was not being honest, and she had walked on without pressing him because she understood that some truths a person had to arrive at in their own time. He hoped she was all right. He thought she probably was. She was younger than him. She was at Starfall. She was home. She was the person in any room who knew where the exits were. He would go to her one day when he was able. One day the exile would be long enough and the world would have moved on to its next catastrophe, and he would find a way back to the smell of orange blossoms and salt, and to his sister, and to the stars above Starfall. He laid the white cloak beside the sword on the ground, folded carefully, because it deserved care regardless of what it signified, because the carefulness was its own kind of honor, the only kind left available to him. He kept the arming sword. It had no history, no significance, no identity. It was just a blade. Then Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, the finest knight the 7 kingdoms had known in living memory, walked east into the pale Dornish sunrise and did not look back. Behind him in the tower, Eddard Stark would find his sister. He would find Dawn and the white cloak and the evidence of a man who had died keeping his oath. He would take the child north. He would name him Jon Snow. He would tell no one. And Arthur Dayne would be dead, which was exactly what was needed.